Welcome to the USC channel, USC Primetime Live, here at the Voice of College Football. I'm Matt Zemek. He's Ethan Inman. So much to cover. It's now Big Ten season. USC entering its Big Ten schedule at Purdue in West Lafayette this Saturday afternoon. And so the intrigue begins to build. And we begin to find out what USC is really made of. We remember last season, USC didn't win any of its trips to the Midwest or the East. Lost at Maryland, lost at Michigan, lost at Minnesota, on and on and on. Like, we want to forget it, but we have to remember it so that hopefully USC is going to get this thing right. Hopefully Lincoln Riley and staff are going to get this thing fixed. So Ethan and myself coming at you talking about this very big game. We set the table for Purdue. And so let's get right into the conversation. And a reminder, we give you an hour guaranteed, free of charge, here at the Voice of College Football. If you want a second hour of Ethan and Matt, $150 of Super Chats. We'll be here for a third hour if you want, $150 more of Super Chats. So just going to get that on the board here. So let's start our conversation, Ethan, and give our fans and our viewers the hard-hitting analysis that they want, that they crave. Sunday night on our show, toward the end of the broadcast, Jeff Rodriguez, Bob Skinner, or Springer, the devoted listeners who really are bringing a lot of intelligent conversation to the chat. They said, okay, we need to solidify these defensive rotations. We need to stick with a formula, establish a hierarchy, ones and twos. Let's identify the dogs. Let's identify the leaders of the pack, establish that, get people established in their roles. Very logical, solid line of analysis. There is simply a complication. I'm not disagreeing with Jeff and Bob. I'm just providing this devil's advocate case, and I want your take on it, Ethan. Because there were injuries at the start of the season, several defensive players didn't play in game one against Missouri State. A few came back, but a few still didn't get in to the second game against Georgia Southern. Like, that complication could certainly create the thought process among the coaching staff, among Danton Lynn, Coach Henney, woof woof, Rob Ryan, and Doug Belk. We would want, in an ideal world, to solidify our rotations at the start of Big Ten play, especially for a road game. But maybe these injuries just don't allow us that luxury just yet. Maybe we do have to still kind of explore a little, tinker a little, instead of having that fixed formula. I agree with the concept of it's Big Ten play. You need to start solidifying what you're doing. You need to have that hierarchy clear to everyone in the locker room and make it clear who's earned that number one role and who's the number two in the backup. I fundamentally do agree with that. But are the injuries preventing that from happening? Do you think that the staff still has to adjust and tinker with the rotations at Purdue?
I do think the injuries are contributing to that a little bit. I was watching Trojans live yesterday, and Lincoln Riley was talking about some of the defensive back play, and he brought up Chasen Johnson in particular, the UCF transfer. And he said he thought that Chasen played a great game, but he didn't get to play very much just because he was kind of on a pitch count. He was one of the players coming back from injury that we mentioned. So that's, something to continue to monitor, I suppose, if Chasen Johnson is still on a pitch count this week, or if, he's able to kind of get off that pitch count. I assume he'd play a little bit more, but he could still be limited. And then in terms of other injury updates, it feels like the offense is getting healthier, and the offense was already pretty healthy. But I saw that, Brian Jackson and Caden Chittenden came out in practice today, but didn't really see any updates on Alex Graham or any of the other defensive guys who have been held out. So I think that could be the case. I think that, we're still looking at some injuries that are affecting USC heading into Purdue. So will there be some tinkering? There could be. I do think, though, the staff at this point needs to have some idea in their mind as to if this game is closer than everyone is expecting it to be. So, if Purdue gives USC a run for their money, they need to have some guys that they can kind of trust and be the go-to guys when it comes down to it. If we're getting into the middle of the fourth quarter and this is a 1-score game. Like, we can't play around on defense anymore. We need to have some go-to guys. And whether that means, we talked a little bit last week about Kamari Ramsey playing out of position, whether that means moving him back, figuring out, one guy that we're just going to bet on at the nickel spot. And I don't even know if necessarily it has to be because the staff has seen a clear, guy who separated themselves, which, I would hope that there is. But even if there isn't, I think that they just need to instill confidence in somebody, because, you need to have that. You need to have at least somebody playing confidently in that spot. Like I said, if it comes down to it, if this game is closer than everybody thought that it was going to be. So I would certainly hope that they're at least making that contingency plan of, a unit of guys that they're going to roll out there if, push comes to shove and they need to go win the football game on the defensive side of the ball.
So let's get into the matchup between USC's defense and Purdue's offense, because I think that's where this game starts. I think that USC's offense should be able to, I think USC's offense is going to score a certain amount of points. Like, I think USC's floor on offense in this game, 24 points. Like, I think USC could play a below average, mediocre game and still score 24 points. That's my floor for the offense. It really comes down to the defense. And as we explained on our Sunday show here at the Voice of College Football, Ethan, USC scoring 59 against Georgia Southern as opposed to the 73 it did against Missouri State was a product of the defense not getting off the field. Georgia Southern was able to control the ball, 26 first downs. If USC's defense had gotten off the field more, you would have seen USC get into the 60s and very possibly the 70s. So the defense has to set the table for this turbocharged offense. If the defense can get off the field, it should all come together. It should all fall into place for this team. But of course, Georgia Southern gets 26 first downs against USC. What's Purdue going to do? Purdue, I would say, is a better team than Georgia Southern. I mean, Georgia Southern lost to Fresno State by 28, and Fresno State was nip and tuck with Oregon State. Easily could have missed. Fresno State needed to make a 41-yard field goal in the final minute to escape Oregon State. So I don't think Georgia Southern's pretty good. I think Purdue is better than Georgia Southern. But now, how much better? Obvious question. But anyway, it starts with the defense. So, Ethan, when we size up the matchup between the USC defense and the Purdue offense and like setting the tone for this game and how it's played, where does it start within the USC defense? Do we focus on the defensive line, just planting its flag and kind of taking the burden off the secondary, or does it start with the secondary? Like, maybe USC is going to allow a bunch of first downs to Purdue. Maybe Purdue's going to move the ball between the 20s, but it's up to the secondary to shut off the faucet of big plays down the field. And so even if Purdue gets a decent amount of time of possession, just shut off the big plays on that back line of defense. Purdue scores 19, 22, and that it's going to be enough for USC to win. So does it start with the D-line? Does it start with the secondary? Where do you come down on that?
It's an interesting question. I feel like Purdue's offense has been pretty inconsistent so far. Ryan Brown had a really good game in week 1 against Ball State, and then this past week it was kind of the opposite. He struggled a little bit against a lesser team in Southern Illinois, but the Purdue run game really took off, after having kind of a mediocre week against Ball State in week 1. So it's kind of hard to know what this Purdue offense truly is. I think the only thing that you can say that they are is inconsistent, which goes to show that it really is kind of a momentum game, and a way that, USC really could build a lot of momentum, really get into Purdue's heads, is by getting into the backfield and utilizing the really talented defensive line that we've seen in the first few weeks. So I could see them dialing up a couple of blitzes early, or, trying to input some more aggressive play calling so that, we can get into the Purdue backfield and also into their heads conversely. But I don't know. I mean, I think this is a more athletic defense and a more talented defense than Ryan Brown has faced this season, but obviously it's not a defense that has been entirely put together because they've had their share of struggles with, miscommunication and just not knowing where to be and all that kind of stuff. So I'm sure that that's going to be pointed out to him on the film to try to get him confident. And I just think, I think I do want to see the defensive line step up and just get into Ryan Brown's head, because I think if you can get in Ryan Brown's head and then you can stop the run even a little bit on top of that, then it'll be a very successful game for the USC defense.
Okay, a couple of follow-ups. Here's one. Do you just rely on your base front four to get that pressure, or do you think it's necessary to send some blitzes early and really send a message?
I think that it really depends on how the first couple of plays of the game go on the defensive side of the ball. Like, I'm not advocating for sending a blitz on 1st and 10, the first time Purdue touches the ball per se. Maybe I could see, Purdue does a couple of short runs and it's like 3rd and 3 or 3rd and 2 and sending a blitz on 3rd and 2 to try to get a 3 and out. I think that would be well-worthy strategy for the USC defense for sure, in terms of trying to send a message early. And kind of it's almost the same line of thinking. If Purdue gets a couple of big first downs on pass plays early, it's like, okay, we need to slow the roll a little bit for the quarterback and try to get him out of rhythm. I think, I think a couple of plays in, I would be hoping to see some blitzes. Again, it really depends on how the first 2 plays of the game go, but that's what I would think is like, 3rd play of the game, not the first play of the game, nothing too crazy, but just don't let Purdue get in any kind of rhythm, I think would be my strategy if I was trying to aid them in their defensive play calling.
So here's my next follow-up. So, if Purdue is driving the ball, let's say 50 to 60 yards but is settling for 38, 40-yard field goals in the first half of the game, using like 4 to 5 minutes of the clock, I'm getting the sense, don't let them get into a rhythm. I'm getting the sense, no, let's not let Purdue control the ball. Even if drives stall out and Purdue's just kicking a bunch of 3-pointers, let's try and get on top of this game. I'm sensing that that's where you're coming from.
I think so, yeah, because I think building confidence in this defense is important. I don't think that the Purdue offense is super talented, so I think that the Purdue offense could get in their own way and, cause some of those situations that you were describing where they have to kick a field goal because, a receiver makes a drop, or, the quarterback makes a bad throw, or the running back makes a bad read. Like, just, they're not, this isn't a top 10 matchup that we're talking about. Like, it's a team that went 1-11 last year, and they're much improved. They've already topped their win total, but I don't have the sense that they're going to be more than a bowl competitor this year, even though they've had a solid first couple of games. So I just think if you're, it's about this game, but it's also about the future as well. Like, you want to build some confidence in this defense because a lot of the mistakes we talked about last week have been mental. So I think to help the defense settle in, like, even if, it's 21-9 because both teams have scored all 3 times, but USC scored touchdowns and Purdue scored field goals. Like, I think it's more about, like, you don't want the defense to settle into this identity of, okay, we're the damage control defense because our offense does really well, because when you play better offenses in the future, the damage control mindset's not going to work. So I think, yes, even if you're limiting Purdue to field goals, I don't think you should be content with that for sure.
Okay, any specific player that you're really, really focused on for the USC defense in this game as, either being an X factor or like just someone who really needs to elevate to kind of lift the entire defensive unit, or someone who just in terms of the matchup in this game, could play a unique role? Any of those directions you want to go in, Ethan? Just a defensive player you want to highlight and circle for our audience here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football.
Yeah, I think, for me, it's a lot of position groups. Like, I want to see the interior defensive line do better at run defense, and then I want to see the secondary just somebody step up opposite DeCarlos Nicholson at the second cornerback spot. So I'll call out Jason Johnson just because Lincoln Riley did say he thought he played a good game and that the one pass interference penalty on him was uncalled for, which I do agree with. I think that Jason Johnson didn't really touch the receiver and he just fell over and a flag was thrown. So if Jason Johnson's not on a pitch clock, I want to see him really come out and establish himself because he was a talented guy coming out of high school and that spot is really wide open. So I'd want to see him really establish himself. And then, like those interior D linemen, Jahid Abasiri, have loved seeing him get after the passer, but we can't, let these interior runs just gash our defense all day long. So I'll call out Jahid Abasiri just because I've liked his pass defense, but not his, not really the interior D line's run defense. So if he can become a monster on both the pass and the run, then that'll be really big for USC as well.
All right, continuing our focus on when Purdue has the ball, USC's defense on the field against Purdue's offense. Continuing our exploration of that half of this game, we have to talk about former USC offensive line coach Josh Henson, now the offensive coordinator for Purdue. This is a big, fat, juicy plot point. And so the natural question is, Ethan, better for Purdue that Henson knows D'Anton Lynn, or better for USC that D'Anton Lynn knows Henson? What's going to be the chess match here? How do you think it's going to unfold, and what specific details are you going to be really interested in the first quarter, first few series of this game when Purdue goes up against USC's defense?
I think it's better for D'Anton Lynn that he knows Josh Henson than it is that Josh Henson knows D'Anton Lynn, just because of, plain and simple, their successes as a coach. If anything, Josh Henson just got a front row seat to what D'Anton Lynn did well, whereas, D'Anton Lynn got a front row seat to some of Josh Henson's struggles. So I think anytime you can really see someone's struggles kind of on display, that provides you a real opportunity to learn how to attack them. Whereas the USC defense wasn't necessarily the best in the country in 2024, but I think that, everyone would consider D'Anton Lynn's first year a success and consider a lot of the things that he did positive things. So I just don't think that Josh Henson is going to have as much to go off of as D'Anton Lynn will. I do think that Purdue does have some coaching advantages elsewhere on their coaching staff, which we may talk about in a little bit, but I don't think that Josh Henson on the USC defense is necessarily one of them.
Let's talk about them. Go right into that. Let's segue right into that.
I think that Purdue's coaching advantages actually come on the defensive side of the ball, just because you have Barry Odom, who coached Jaden Mayava at UNLV, and then you have the Purdue, I believe he's the defensive coordinator now. Yes, Mike Scherer, who also was the defensive coordinator at UNLV. And then you have Henson as well, who, it has a really intimate knowledge of the USC offensive line. So I think if there's any advantage that exists on the Purdue coaching staff, it's going to be knowing the weaknesses of some of the offensive players at USC. I would expect, and I think that this is going to be a real litmus test for sure on how much Jaden Mayava really has grown, because, obviously he came into USC with some limitations. He, in the year that he played under Barry Odom at UNLV, he had 17 touchdowns, but also 10 interceptions. So he was not necessarily a polished player there either. So, I can basically guarantee that Barry Odom is sitting, out in West Lafayette with some preconceived notion of what Jaden Mayava's weaknesses are. And he's going to try to attack what Jaden Mayava's weaknesses were basically last year and the year before, because he's, going to look at, I think that a lot of Mayava's weaknesses at UNLV kind of carried over into last year. So if, Mayava can really hold up against the way that Barry Odom attacks him and, the defensive staff, because Mike Scherer also knows Mayava really well, the way that Mike Scherer attacks him, that'll be a real sign that, all of this hype that Lincoln Riley has been pumping about Mayava being a different quarterback and all that stuff is really true. So I think that's a big storyline I'm watching in terms of a potential advantage that Purdue could have on the coaching staff. And then, a little bit smaller, but Henson obviously knows a lot of the guys on the offensive line. So theoretically, he knows their weaknesses as well and may have some intel for the defensive staff on how to attack them. it's also just a bigger challenge for the offensive line because it's a big, bad Big Ten, defensive line that they're facing. So I just think those two fronts, especially like Maeva and the offensive line, there's a lot of intel advantage at Purdue. So I'd be interested to see if they use that to attack USC in like a more specific targeted way because they have all that intel.
All right, we're going to get to the USC offense versus the Purdue defense in just a bit. I mean, you began to talk about that matchup, but one more question about the defense. Do we look at this as a game where D'Anton Lynn, as the leader of this defense, the play caller for this defense, needs to be the guy who really steps forward? Or do we view this as a Coach Henne issue, that the D-line can't be run on in this game? Or do we look at this as a Doug Belk game where, like, Doug Belk needs to get his secondary locked in after two very disjointed performances? Like, do we share the focus, spotlight, burden throughout the staff, or is this like it's going to start with D'Anton Lynn and it's going to filter down to everybody else?
I think pretty much everyone is equally in my spotlight except for Coach Henne, just because of how well the defensive line has done in the past game. Like, they're, regardless of how they've performed in run defense, like, it's been a huge step forward in terms of, the pass rush for the defensive line in the first 2 weeks. So, if the defensive line performs poorly in the Purdue game, then, my thoughts on where Coach Henne is and how much I, want to pay some extra attention and scrutiny to him could change. But I think for now, he's kind of off the leash a little bit more than the rest of the guys, just because we've talked about at the linebacker position how it's kind of outside of Eric Gentry. It's like, who else there? And then in the secondary, it's similar. It's like we got Kamari Ramsey, and then DeCarlos Nicholson has locked down his spot. And then everybody else, it's just, we got to kind of, we're still figuring it out. And then also just the amount of mental mistakes too. I mean, last week you had all the penalties and the miscommunication. And I think that, you can't make players, I said this last week, it was kind of my little mantra for improvement is you can't make players a year more experienced or a year better in a week, but you can correct some of those like focus attitude issues in a week and say, hey, like we can't get frustrated at each other when, there's a blown coverage. Like, we all need to take personal responsibility. Like, we need to communicate better. Those are all like intangible, correctable culture things that I think I want to see them fix. And that's mostly in the secondary. And then it's also just about picking the guys you're going to trust. So it is a bit of D'Anton Lynn because he's the leader of the defense and he needs to set that tone and he does need to do the play calling, but it's also the positional group guys just picking who their dogs are going to be and also like kind of passing on the leadership to those top dogs and saying, hey, like, we're going to fix the small little cultural issues that have popped up as well.
All right, now let's go to the matchup between the USC offense and the Purdue defense. And, Ethan, like, as a football analyst and full confession, I didn't play competitive high school or college football. So, there's always going to be that element of, hey, Matt, you never played the game. How do you get off, saying the things that you say? The thing about football that has always made it very relatable and like offers me, I think, a path to, say things that are informed and logical is play calling. Like, play calling, you can always look at how a coach, how a staff unrolls a game plan, and you can identify whether it was smart or whether it wasn't. And obviously, that's a fine line to walk for myself and any other commentator. Like, you want to be fair, but like, if they're clearly not calling the right play, if they're clearly not taking the right approach, you say so. So play calling, play selection, play mixture is pretty consistently my natural starting point for diving into a game and how it unfolds and what needs to happen and like how the coaching staff can make it happen. So Ethan, how does USC staff attack this game? And the offense has performed brilliantly. Like, not going to take anything away from these young men on the offense. They've been great through 2 games, but great against cupcakes. We can all admit that. We can all be adults and acknowledge that. And now you get into the Big Ten, and Purdue's not a top tier Big Ten team, but it's still a Big Ten road game. And the thing we have to just remind everyone about, USC couldn't win at Maryland last year. So like that makes this trip to West Lafayette, like it's not a gimme, it's not a layup, or certainly you can't treat it that way. You need to go out there, crush some skulls, and then say, okay, now we've shown we can do this. Now we've evolved. Now we've taken that step forward. We're climbing up the ladder at USC, getting back to where we think we're supposed to be. So how does Lincoln Riley start this game? Do you go conservative? Do you try and throw some jabs down the field? Is it more about getting Jaden Maiava, established with just some easy throws? Lots of different ways to go at this. Where do you land on that?
I don't think you want to take this Purdue defense for granted at all. I think that they've only allowed 17 total points this season, and sure, all 17 were to Southern Illinois. But they did shut out Ball State, which honestly is a better defensive performance than USC put on against Missouri State, which is like an equatable program, basically. So, at this point, if you were just, a college football analyst who hadn't watched any previous seasons of college football and, or you had amnesia and just completely forgot last year, and you were just looking at this year, you would think that, the Purdue defense has put on a better performance than the USC defense. I'm not saying the Purdue defense is better. I'm just saying that, we still have a lot of hope for this USC defense. We still think it's very talented, and yet Purdue's put up better results on the scoreboard. So I don't think taking this Purdue defense for granted is in our best interest. I think that we need to attack them like they're a serious Big Ten defense. And I think that goes back to running the football, to be completely honest with you. I think, we've been calling for it all offseason, and the running back room is deep and it's talented, and it's really shown in these first couple of weeks just how talented it is. So I think you set the tone by running the football. Maybe Lincoln Riley seems to, really hesitate to call traditional plays. So if you, want to get the ball to these running back playmakers in space, maybe you do a couple of, swing passes, screens. Maybe it's not, even a run to the running backs. Maybe it's, a couple of screens to the wide receivers. I could see, getting the ball into Mekhi Lemon's hands on some little, short screens or handoffs even to be beneficial as well. So it doesn't have to be like hand the ball to Wayman Jordan 10 times until we get into the end zone on the first drive. But I do think, not just letting Maiava settle in to the road environment, letting him settle in against a better defense, and also instilling some more confidence in these running backs. Because, these running backs, it's also going to be their first Big Ten football game. Like they are, Wayman Jordan is a JUCO transfer, and then Eli Sanders is a New Mexico transfer. Like they haven't played Big Ten football yet either. So I do think that they're very talented, and I think that they're going to eat against Big Ten defenses just as much as they have in the first 2 weeks. So I think, showing them too, like, hey, you can do this, I think that's all in USC's best interest. And so I think pound the rock the first drive for sure. Again, doesn't have to be handing the ball off 10 times to Wayman Jordan. Like maybe get Mekhi Lemon involved, hand him the ball, throw him a couple screens. But mostly behind the line of scrimmage, getting the ball into the hands of your playmakers, I think, is in their best interest.
Ethan, you make a great point, and you offer a timely reminder that run versus pass. I say this all the time during football season, so football season's here. I'm going to say it again. Run versus pass is certainly important, in terms of play mixture. But some passes are essentially runs, and some runs, can be as aggressive as pass plays. So like a screen pass is technically a pass, but it might as well be a run. It's an extended handoff, so that always worth reminding our audience of that a play that can be technically a pass, but it's essentially like a run. Like it's getting the ball to a running back or a receiver in a very safe way. It's basically trying to create an angle for a runner, for a ball carrier. So continuing with our play selection discussion, Ethan, one thing we discussed throughout the offseason, and it's a big point of emphasis for a lot of USC fans, a lot of the fans on here in the chat, that, first down run doesn't work. You have 2nd and 9, 2nd and 8. Don't abandon the run. Go ahead and run it again on 2nd and 9, 2nd and 8. You don't have to throw the ball on 2nd and 9, 2nd and 8. So we've talked about that one. All right. The situation we haven't talked about enough because of the emphasis on 1st down, 2nd down. Let's now go into 3rd and 3. And I'm not really talking about the whole season. I'm really talking about this game against Purdue because, if you're going up against Michigan, you're probably throwing the ball on 3rd and 3. Like you don't expect to overpower a Michigan defensive line and get 3 yards on the ground on 3rd down. But against Purdue, maybe a different story. So maybe 3rd and 3 is not necessarily an automatic passing down against Purdue. Any thoughts on USC approaching that, 3rd and, it's not medium, it's not short yardage, it's kind of just 3rd and in between. 3rd and 3, maybe 3rd and a short 4.
I think it's an interesting question. I think Purdue is such a confusing team because, we talked a little bit about how it was the pass game that did well in the first game and the run game that did well in the second game. It's kind of similar on the defensive side of the ball. Like in the first game, the pass defense was great and the run defense was okay. And then in the second game, the run defense was great and the pass defense was only okay. So I really don't know, what the strengths and what the weaknesses of this Purdue defense are yet. I think that I think it's going to depend a lot on how the game's going. Like if it's, the first drive and it's your first 3rd and 3 you're facing, you don't really know too much. But if it's like, if the run's going well and it's 3rd and 3, then I think running, there's no reason not to run the football. That's common sense. If the passes, if we're passing well, throw the football. But I think that I think it also depends on when in the game it is. I think if we're talking, early in the game, it's always safer, to try to run the football to get short pickups. So I would try to run the football. And, then if running the football doesn't work, then, you put the ball in Maiava's hands. I think a really good strategy on 3rd and 3 actually would be, putting the ball in Maiava's hands in the sense like make him make a read, like make him decide whether
RPO.
Yes, RPO, or even just like a read option, like have him decide whether to hand the ball off or take it himself. Because I think utilizing his legs could also be really advantageous here, especially if you're doing the strategy that I suggested, which is really pounding the rock in the beginning of the game. Maiava really pulling it out of the running back's stomach and running it himself could throw off the defense a lot as well. So I think some RPOs and some read options on 3rd and 3 are like, if I just had to pick one play, regardless of situation, that's what I would pick. But yeah, I think, how the game is going is going to affect a lot, obviously.
Okay. So in the offseason, we talked about 1st down, 2nd down. Now we've talked about 3rd and in between. This leads us to the next one, the final down and distance question for USC in this game against Purdue. 4th and short. And we're kind of piggybacking off the previous conversation about 3rd and 3. If you run the ball on 3rd and 3 and you get 2, that sets up 4th and 1. So you can be patient with the running game, especially if you believe that you're going to be a really good 4th down team. You're going to be a really good 4th down offense. So 4th and 1s. Is this a game where USC needs to be going for it on 4th and 1 pretty much all the time, no matter where it is on the field? Now, obviously, there are certain game situations, end of half, game is within 2 or 3 points where you would obviously do A rather than B. But kind of if it's not end of game where kind of your hand is forced or it's just overwhelmingly obvious what a team should do, like middle of the half and generally like middle of the field for the most part. Should USC pretty consistently be going for it on 4th and short in this game? And provided that it has a lead, let's say a modest lead, like 7 to 10 points. You're not free and clear, but you're not trailing. If you're trailing, you're pretty much going for it. So, in kind of like neutral situations, basically, That's what it amounts to. Should USC be relentlessly going for it on 4th and 1, or should it be punting, flipping the field, trusting the defense to make plays? Because early in the season, this team's identity is still evolving. First 2 games, it's been an offense-first team, but do you want this to be an offense-first team? Is that the best iteration of this team? It's hard to get a feel for that. I mean, it could be that USC will be an offense-first team and everything will be really good, but one could also make a very strong argument. No, the defense needs to be leading the charge here. And so if you believe in yourself and you think of yourself as a defense-first team, that generally means you're trusting the defense to smother the opposition and dominate field position. So you're not taking quite as many chances on 4th and 1. So just in this game, not the whole season, in this game, kind of at this transition from cupcake to Big Ten road game, how should USC generally in relatively neutral situations handle 4th and 1?
I would say I don't think that there's anyone on the offensive side of the ball, like player personnel wise, that's not confident in this offense getting a yard right now. So I think that I would actually want to see them punting the ball and turning it over to the defense most of the time, only because I think installing confidence in this defense is important right now. And I think if you're going for it on 4th and 1 in your own territory or near midfield, like basically out of field goal range or out of the red zone every time, I think that sends a little bit of a subliminal message to the defense that's like, hey, like we, would rather risk turning the ball over in a non-advantageous field position situation than like trust you guys to get us the ball back, quickly. So I do think that generally I would want to see them trust the defense a little bit, like you said, if we're down and, it's a desperate situation, then I'll obviously go for it and don't worry about that. But I do think that if you asked everyone who, is kind of a contributing player on the offensive side of the ball, if they believe that this offense can get a yard on 4th down, they would say, yeah. So it's not about not being able to get the yard or, the potential of turning the ball over deep in your own territory or near midfield. I just think it's more about like telling the defense like, hey, we could go for it here, but we're trusting you to get us a 3-and-out and get us the football back. So we don't really even feel the need to, if that makes sense.
All right, let's now get into position groups and players. So to me, it's all about the offensive line. Like that's been my long-standing theme here at the Voice of College Football, the USC channel. The offensive line is going to determine how smoothly this game goes. I mean, obviously the defense as well. The defense making sure to not give up big plays. But like if the defense is okay, defense doesn't need to be spectacular, but if the defense is okay, then it's a matter of, okay, offensive line, you can just kind of bring it home. As long as Purdue doesn't go crazy on offense, it's the offensive line can slam the door on this game, get USC a win. So on the offensive line, what you've seen from the first 2 games, some surprising rotations last week against Georgia Southern with Micah Banuelos getting a substantial amount of reps. Who do you see as like the key hinge point type player who, good performance, USC's walking away with a win, bad performance, this could get really dicey. Who's that hinge point player on USC's offensive line?
I think I really want to see, we're talking about Big Ten play. We're talking about, really a lot more physical players on the Purdue defensive line and all that. I really want to see Elijah Page just have a superstar game. I think that would, be really huge for USC's offensive line confidence. I think that just as a group, they've had a lot of kind of personnel changes and a lot of switching in and out. So if they can just have, him and maybe even I'll lump Tobias Raymond in there as well. Like if those 2 guys on the left side of the line can really just be skull crushers, then that can, help Mayava be confident and at least, his blind side. It can help the rest of the offensive line be confident that like, hey, it's not like I'm nervous and everybody else is nervous too. Like those guys are taking care of their jobs. So it's not going to be like five Purdue defenders are on Mayav in the pocket. If I have a bad rep or whatever. So I think the onus is on those guys to really step up as leaders of this offensive line, just because they're really still figuring out the rotation at the other positions. I will say really liked some of what I saw from Justin Tauna'u last week. He had the one really big highlight where he kind of like threw a Georgia Southern player and he went flying. That was really entertaining to see. So if both tackle positions for USC can really lock in as well, that'll be really beneficial, because then I think even if Alani Noah doesn't have a great game because his confidence is a little bit shot after he didn't get the start last week, or if Benuelos ends up getting the start and he doesn't do too well, then like at least you can get the ball to the outside and set the edge. And maybe if the interior run isn't doing so well, maybe you're throwing some of those screens that I talked about to Makai Lemon and getting the ball into his hands. So yeah, I mean, I want to see the tackles really step up and continue to kind of crush skulls, and because like I said, it just increases the confidence for everybody else. And then, I mean, I've talked about basically everybody, but I'll just throw Killian O'Connor out there as well, just because he's kind of the guy at center that Lincoln Riley's continued to instill confidence in and say, hey, you've been a captain the first couple of weeks, so if he can be a real leader, and then I think that USC can start to have some more consistency with this offensive line unit and not have to be switching him and John Ray Reed out and switching the guards out as well. And I think that that's important at getting towards this time of the year, is really solidifying people, and consistency against these Big Ten teams is going to be key, I think.
Okay, how essential is it, as we continue with our look at the USC offense going up against Purdue's defense, how essential is it, first Big Ten road game, that a very clear number 3 pass catcher behind Jacoby Lane and Makai Lemon emerges in this game? And it doesn't necessarily have to be a wide receiver. It could be Lake McCree at tight end. It could be a running back out of the backfield. But just, tactically, I'm really getting at this. This is really the question I'm asking. USC can say, hey, we have Jacoby Lane and Makai Lemon, Purdue, and you don't. And we're just going to get those 2 studs the ball, and there's nothing you can do about it. Or, no, we need third and fourth options. We need safety valves. We need other players to be a real factor in the passing game in order for us to get this W. Which way would you lean on that one?
I think the number 3 receiver at this point is Lake McCree, to be completely honest with you. And I think that the tight end position has really impressed me this year in general. Just, Lake McCree, Walker Lyons, even Carson Tavarachi had the touchdown catch. He's probably not going to have too much of an impact in regular season games. It'll probably be McCree and Lyons. And you're seeing a lot of 12 personnel as well, as, people have been talking about in the chat. So I don't know. I think it's not really what I expected, but I think at this point that is the number 3 receiver. Yeah, it's kind of like what Russ Campbell just said in the chat. I think the number 3 receiver right now is Lake McCree, and I think that that's a good thing. I think that USC should continue to kind of emphasize that and pour into that, because I think it takes some of the pressure off of the number 3 receivers. There's nobody at the number 3 wide receiver spot that's super experienced or super established. Zacharias Williams was supposed to be great for Utah, but we've seen it countless times in college football and across sports. Like, hype and production are not the same thing. So it takes some of the pressure off Zacharias Williams. It takes some of the pressure off Tino Kynes, who's obviously still a true freshman. And they can just go out there and play freely. And then if they produce, they produce. But if not, there's some veterans and some proven guys all across the offense that, they don't have to feel like they have to carry a lion's share of the offensive production, if that makes sense. And it also, like, we talked about it when Mark Bowman committed earlier in the summer, but like, Mark Bowman is coming next year. He's supposedly a generational prospect at tight end. So if this offense can figure out how to include the tight ends more, that's really great. And then I just personally am really high on Lake McCree. I think that he's really talented. I think that he, has been a really unfortunate victim of some injuries throughout his college career, but the flashes that I've seen from Lake McCree have been really positive, and he looks really healthy, and he looks like, a tight end that can really be a number 3 receiver in this offense. So it's not necessarily like a big reversal or like a big thing that they need to find out per se. I just think that they need to keep hammering the tight end position, and if they continue to do that, I think it'll benefit them in a lot of ways.
All right, we have plenty more coming up for you here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football. A reminder, if you want a second hour, well, we're $150 short of that, but we still have about 15 minutes. If you want to get a second hour, super chats are how that happens. But anyway, before Ethan and I continue our conversation, a word from our sponsor here at the Voice of College Football. We'll see you in a minute.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select a betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
And we remind you that Mark Rogers' National College Football Show at the Voice of College Football is every night, 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific. That's Monday through Saturday. So follow Mark throughout the week. And then, of course, for Saturday night, when some games are going and he's reviewing the other scores and results across the nation. Let's also remind you here at the Voice of College Football, Ethan is once again wearing that bad boy, his USC VOCFB cap. You go to vocfb.com/shop. And you can get a look at these VOCFB caps. And again, Ethan's modeling the USC VOCFB cap. He has that camo version. So, Ethan doing his job, representing what we have to offer in terms of USC merch at the college football. And we remind you, if you don't want to drop a super chat during the show, well, there's also the memberships at the USC YouTube channel here at the VOCFB. And if you buy one of those snappy VOCFB USC caps, that supports us. It supports the USC channel. It supports Mark Rogers and the whole company, the Voice of College Football. So, final segment of this first hour. We'll see about a second hour. But Ethan, one of the really interesting talking points about USC last season and why the team didn't win any of those trips to the Midwest, any of those road games to the Midwest or the East, was travel. And once again, this is not a 100% confirmed fact, but people that we talked to, and when I did my show with Tim Prangley last year, there was the sense that USC was getting into its Big Ten Midwestern, Central or Eastern time zone locations on a Thursday. And I've stated, if that's the case, I don't know it 100% for a fact, but if that was the case, that needs to be revised. This team needs to be flying in on Wednesday. You have all that Big Ten television money to pay for an extra night of hotel lodgings, give players another day to acclimate, another day to adjust. You fly in on Thursday evening or even Thursday afternoon, you have one full day off before game day on Saturday, and that is a quick transition. Why rush it? Why not just get into West Lafayette, Ann Arbor, Happy Valley, Piscataway, any of those Big Ten locations? Get in on a Wednesday, and then one day can just be kind of for relaxing. Another day can be for academics. So really interested in how USC is handling the travel and the logistics of these Big Ten road games that aren't on the West Coast, that aren't Eugene, that aren't Seattle. And so, Ethan, you've dug up some details on this. Now, we don't have a full picture, but we have some details. Let's share that with our audience here at the Voice of College Football.
Yeah, I haven't heard whether or not they have made any dramatic schedule changes. It sounds to me like they haven't, but Lincoln Riley has alluded to, starting yesterday and extending into today, that there are some, minor schedule tweaks that they've made. And so what he said was that, so yesterday he just alluded to travel changes and didn't really expand on it at all. And that was on Trojans Live, the Trojans Live show on YouTube yesterday. And then today at practice, they asked him more about it. And he said they're using a different type of airplane because the flights are going to be longer. And also so that some of their bigger players can be more comfortable on those longer flights. And they're changing the meal times, and they're also changing the sleep schedule. He said that they've done a lot of research into, what actually is the best sleep schedule to get the players the most rested, and, also timing the meals so that, they can get the best rest and all that kind of stuff. It looks like people are saying in the chat that Lincoln Riley's been saying it's Friday. Again, I didn't personally see that, but based on what his comments have been that I have seen, that's what makes the most sense to me, just because, he's being a little vague. And it's also, when he does talk about it, it's like minor changes. Like if you, change.
Let me interrupt. Mm-hmm. When you said it makes the most sense, you are talking strictly in a journalistic sense, in terms of reading the tea leaves, not in terms of what's actually the best plan for this team, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I just want to be very clear about that, very clear.
Yes, I'm talking in terms of,
I hate this. If it's true, I hate this.
Yes, I'm talking in terms of just analyzing what Lincoln Riley is saying and whether or not, what makes sense about his tactics. And I think, it seems like if you were going to change it to Friday, you just come out and say, oh, by the way, we're flying out on Thursday, or we're flying out on Wednesday. And, that would have kind of put all of everyone's questions to bed. But just the way that it's been we've looked into some things, we've made some changes. And then today his emphasis is on these other little minor details and, kind of downplaying it, making it look minor. Everyone's reporting that they're saying in the chat, or, the things that people are saying in the chat line up to what I would assume, which is that. So Sid Siegel says the practice interview is online, and Connor Morissette asks, so you were flying out on Friday? Riley responds, yes. That's after a question that I saw asked, which was, about the scheduling thing. So, or I would assume that that's what follows. I haven't seen the full video, but I'll go and check that out after this, obviously. So all reports and indications are looking like Friday, and just minor changes to the travel schedule.
Man, that really ticks me off. Just gonna put it out there, because this is just monumentally stupid, and for no good reason. I mean, to me, this comes across as pinching pennies, just not wanting to spend a few extra bucks on lodging. And for the academic angle, again, if you fly in earlier to a location, that means that gives more time for the academic advisors to advise these athletes. It actually allows for more chance to be intentional and focused on academics in addition to your game prep. You can spend Thursday for one, you can spend Friday for the other. Talking about, one day for game prep, one day for academics. Again, USC is not cash poor. So this is just incredibly dumb, assuming that it is true, and this is pretty solid confirmation of that. It just makes me enormously angry that Lincoln Riley would, as Jeff Rodriguez says, why does he always take the hard way? Absolutely. So that is a really big deal for me, because I thought that USC was playing it wrong. It was playing its cards wrong, handling the logistics very poorly last year. The results spoke for themselves. So here we don't have any improvement. If anything, we have a regression. in terms of how USC and Lincoln Riley are handling the logistics of these trips. So that does not fill me with confidence for this season. Now, I mean, USC should be able to get past Purdue, even if flying in on Friday. But like, if this is how it's going to be for South Bend, if this is how it's going to be for Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska, yeah, not making me feel especially good. So, Ethan, one more item we have to hit in as we conclude our first hour, and it's looking like that's going to be the only hour tonight on the Voice of College Football, unless someone wants to drop in $150. The AP poll voter, Haley Sawyer, and it's interesting, and it's ironic, or maybe not ironic, but it's interesting that she does cover USC for the Southern California News Group, but that's kind of incidental. But this became a big story, and in my mind, rightly so. It's not so much that she didn't rank South Florida and that she kept Florida in the top 15. Like, that's egregiously bad. But that's not the story. The story was, well, this really doesn't matter, and I don't want to talk about my thought process. To me, that's the story, and that's the issue. You're given an AP poll vote, like, that is a privileged position, and you don't have to accept that position. You can say, I'll pass. No one's forcing you as an AP poll voter to vote. You can give that honor to someone else. If you have that position, you can make bad votes, fine, but at least defend your position. At least show your homework, right? Show your thought process. Like, I think you are obligated as a point of ethics. Like, it's not morally wrong, but it's ethically dubious that you would get this privileged position and then not explain how you are doing your work, how you are doing your job. So it's not the horrible ballot that she submitted. It's that I don't care to talk about my thought process, and it really doesn't matter. It's statistically insignificant. And that goes to a life ethic. Doesn't matter what your job is. If you say, well, my little job, my little position doesn't matter in the bigger scheme of things, that is what ethics is. Ethics is, if people do the right thing, the good outcome happens for society. And if everyone does the wrong thing, the bad outcome happens for society. If you're saying my position doesn't matter, that you're giving license to everyone else to say, my position doesn't matter, my job doesn't matter. So if everyone thinks that way, we have complete societal collapse and anarchy. Like, just so the ethics of that are what get me. Ethan, your take.
Yeah, just to answer a couple questions in the chat. Bob's asking if she's a beat writer for UCLA. She's a USC beat writer. She writes about USC for the SoCal News Group and the Orange County Register, which is actually where I'm going to start my whole spiel on this situation. This is really unfortunate for the Orange County Register, I think, because you're replacing Luca Evans, right? Luca Evans is now covering. He's covering the Denver Broncos for the Denver Post. He moved to the Denver Post. That's the reason why Haley Sawyer now covers USC football. This is her first year covering USC football for SoCal News Group. And it's just a really bad look that, you go from, and I am not super familiar with Luca Evans's work. I didn't really read too many of his articles. People in the chat probably are a little bit more familiar with that. My only interactions with him were like being just kind of around, and I never really talked to him in person. My only interactions were being around him at different sporting events. But, you did have that whole controversy a couple of years back with him reporting on conversations that weren't inside of the press conference and getting in trouble, and then Lincoln Riley banning him. And so you go from that, a SoCal News Group person making national news for the way that they covered USC incorrectly. And then now you have, this person who replaced him, who's already making national news not for covering college football incorrectly. So it's a weird pattern that we're starting to see with SoCal News Group. Really, really interesting there. And yeah, I just think I agree with you wholeheartedly on this whole her not caring is really the bigger issue. Like, yes, if she would have come out and said, because I've been following this on Twitter all day. There's exactly one like thread of tweets that I've seen that defended her from one account. And the guy's argument basically was that she probably made like a blatant error. Like she literally thought that Florida won the game and South Florida lost. And then was trying to protect her reputation and knew that if she admitted that blatant error that she would get dragged in the same way. So instead she was kind of trying to downplay it and be like, oh, it's not that serious, and just kind of because she is new, which I totally understand that, line of logic and that self-preservation instinct, because I would be tempted to do the same thing. Like I hate admitting that I've made mistakes. I will if I have to, because it's my journalistic duty. And I've done it on this show and I've done it on Twitter. And I do it when I, screw up and I try to do my best so that I don't screw up in the first place. But like when you do, you kind of have to. It's your journalistic duty to come out and admit that you made a mistake. So I get the instinct and I get that line of thinking, but it's just if that is the line of thinking that she followed, that's still very immature and a large issue and something that's worth talking about, because you can't. As a journalist, you kind of have a duty to the people who follow you and the people who read your work to tell the truth, right? To tell the truth about your process, to be very transparent about how you got the information you got, to the best of your ability, to the most that the work that you do is willing, and allowing you to. You have to be honest. You have to be honest about any biases that you have. This is a core tenet of journalism. You have to do that. So, regardless of any backlash that she may have feared facing, like the right thing to do is to come out and say, I made a mistake. This, was wrong. And I honestly, like looking at the rest of her poll, because that's the most egregious issue. The most egregious issue is that she ranked Florida and not South Florida. But there's some pretty puzzling stuff at the bottom of the poll as well. I mean, you have Arizona State ranked, you have Baylor ranked, and then you don't have Missouri State ranked, who beat Baylor and are unbeaten. And then you don't have
Wait, hold on. Who beat Baylor? Right. Auburn. You're referring to Auburn.
Auburn beat Baylor. Yes. Baylor. For Baylor, it's Auburn, and then it's not Missouri State. It's Mississippi State that beat Arizona State.
Arizona State.
So
yes.
Those teams like literally have head-to-head victories, and they don't. It's like the logic. There's just no logic to it. It's a lot based on last year. I'm sensing a lot of self-preservation in there. Like, she's trying to rank teams that had big victories or rank teams that, were in the playoff last year. That's kind of the Arizona State example. But you just got to be able to do basic research. And it feels like a lot of this could have been solved. She doesn't even have to watch the games to know that ranking Arizona State and not ranking Mississippi State is an issue. And so is ranking Baylor and not ranking Auburn. That's an issue. You can't. It's like it's a fundamental issue that anyone who just checks the scores on ESPN could see. Like you did not have to watch Auburn versus Baylor to know that Baylor does not deserve a spot in the poll over Auburn. Auburn won by 14 points. That's the simple fact of the matter. That's all you need to know. And Auburn, doesn't have a horrible loss on its resume. Like Baylor, sure, they had a great win. It's because they beat a team that was in the college football playoff, probably is the reason she put them in the poll. But again, then you have to just go down the ladder. So if they're better than a team that made the playoff, then the team that beat them by that logic is better than them and the team that made the playoff. So you just can't. You have to be able to track at least the storylines and at least the ESPN app, basically. Like I said, like, yes, in an ideal world, the AP voters, they watch all the games. But, we only have so many hours in the day. So I'll give her the benefit of the doubt in the sense that you don't have to watch all the games. But this is an issue that could have been solved by checking the ESPN app and doing your due diligence. And yeah, like her very like laissez-faire attitude works if you run a social media account and you like come up with your own rankings based on your own opinions, and you just like post it out there and you don't represent the SoCal news group or the AP itself or the University of Southern California, because mind you, she is the only USC beat writer who votes in the AP poll. She's the only one. So she's not only, representing the SoCal News Group, representing the AP, she's representing the University of Southern California. So like, you can't just treat it as if it was a graphic you made on Instagram and you just kind of like made it up. Like, you need to be willing to put in the work, because like you said, there are so many people who would kill to be an AP voter. Like, if being an AP voter for me personally would be like the honor of my life, and I would, stop doing so many of the things that I do in my free time just so I could dedicate myself to, being as informed about college football as I possibly could. And there's so many people out there like that. And I also want to just very briefly bash on this notion. I don't want anyone to think that, this is a misogynistic issue. Like, nobody should be bashing her because she's a woman. There are plenty of very talented women who graduated from USC in my class who I think could step into her role and put together a better AP poll than she did. So I would advocate for them to get a chance, in fact. So I just am really frustrated with that, because it's an issue that the very common, very casual, you could just watch USC football and just make sure that you're checking in on what all the other programs are doing on the ESPN app and have written a better poll than this. And like, it's just journalism 101, that when you make a mistake, you own up to it and you say, I did this wrong, I'm sorry. And you own the fact that you're still going to get backlash, because you're going to get backlash for that way, but at least you did the right thing. Whereas now you're getting backlash for doing the wrong thing. And I don't think that this is, going to die down for her anytime soon, unfortunately, because the national media has picked up on it. And that video has made its round on basically every big sports Instagram account, every Instagram account and Twitter account that cares about college football. So she's not going to be hearing the end of it for a long time, unfortunately.
When we were kids, right, and our parents catch us doing something wrong, do we pretend that we didn't do anything wrong, or do we say, okay, mommy, okay, daddy, I screwed up. I'm going to own this. I'm going to do better next time. Like, we all know what the adult response is. And just to pick on Ethan's point, like, this isn't a gender thing, and no one should make this a gender thing. If a male said, I don't want to explain my thought process, I would be skewering that voter too. Like, it's substance, right? It's not who's saying it. It's the substance. It's the principle of what's happening. I'm an AP poll voter, and I don't want to explain my thought process in a public forum as a journalist. I'm going to get on that every time. And it could be black, white, brown, blue, orange, transgender. I don't care. I'm going to get on the thought process, because we care about doing things properly here at the Voice of College Football. All right, before we go, Gixer Squid, $10 super chat. Thank you, Gixer. Love you, man, and you love our show. We really appreciate your loyalty and your kind words. Serious question. Given Michigan and Illinois' current ranking, coupled with USC currently being unranked, where do you think will be ranked if they beat both teams? I've seen Bob Springer say in the chat, and I think he's correct, USC will be top 12, top 15 if it beats those teams and is 6-0. Like, things will take care of themselves. You win your games, you will rise, and you will be in the playoff mix. I think that's the main thing there. I don't think we really need to go too deep into that. But let's just offer a final element here on on poll voting and how to do it right, and people who set the right industry standard. Let's go to a couple different resources. First, let's go to the Voice of College Football and our friend Mark Rogers. You want to catch Mark Rogers' top 25 that actually makes sense. He does that every week during the season, ranking teams properly. And just to give you a teaser, you want to read this article at the VOCFB website, vocfb.com. You'll see it on the homepage, but here's the link, the direct link to it. Mark Rogers' top 5 that actually makes sense. You will see he has South Florida at number 6. And like, that is a mature voter. He's not projecting where teams will end up at the end of the season. He's not projecting, okay, which team is going to be favored in a Las Vegas sports book on a neutral field. No, he's going by what teams have actually accomplished. So USF beating Boise State, which was the Mountain West preseason favorite, and then beating Florida on the road Like, that is a better body of work than the teams just below South Florida. Like, Illinois has a win over Duke, but Illinois also has a win over an FCS cupcake. So South Florida has achieved more than Illinois. Mark Rogers' top 25 that actually makes sense. That is a mature way to vote in the polls. So that's one thing. And then another thing to present to you here at the Voice of College Football. I am a staff writer for USA Today. Obviously, Trojans Wire is under the USA Today umbrella, but also I am a contributor at College Sports Wire. And College Sports Wire basically covers national college football. It includes some of the college wire sites like Trojans Wire for USC, but it also looks at just the sport nationally and covers a lot of the teams where there isn't a college wire site, for that team, like Vols Wire, Roll Tide Wire, Longhorns Wire. We're able to cover the teams other than the wire sites, and also just additionally looking at college football in general. So I have a cover story up on 5 details every fair top 25 college football ballot should have, and I get into where South Florida should be ranked. I get into various things with Miami, Texas, Indiana, Florida State, Notre Dame, Arizona State. So you can check that at College Sports Wire, collegesportswire.usatoday.com to get more perspective, more details on how to do a ballot right. Trojan Fight in the chat said, "Have you ever been a voter?" No. And I don't like polls. And I don't think we should we shouldn't vote on a single darned thing in college football until after election day. I think we should wait until the middle of November. The first 2 months of the season, we should just be studying, observing, taking notes. And then in November, when it really matters, we start compiling resumes and we rank teams. So I've never enjoyed voting, but I know how to do it. And Mark Rogers certainly models how to do it properly. So you want to check out his top 25 that actually makes sense. Okay, folks, and Jeff Rodriguez comes in with a $10 super chat. Jeff, you're so loyal to myself. Thank you, Jeff, for your contribution. So we got $20 in the door, but of course, that's not enough for a second hour of Ethan and Matt. So we're going to call it a night. Purdue on Saturday afternoon. Ethan and I are going to be here on Sunday, late afternoon in the West, 5 o'clock Pacific. That's 8 o'clock in the East. We review the Purdue game. And a reminder that Sundays are just basically reviewing the previous USC game, reviewing the weekend. Tuesdays are when we preview the next game on the schedule. So, we're not going to be looking ahead to Michigan State on Sunday. That's what we're going to do next Tuesday. Michigan State, that kickoff announced for 8 p.m. at the Coliseum. But Sunday, it's all about Purdue. It's all about that first Big Ten road game for USC. Ethan and I are going to be here 5 Pacific, 8 p.m. in the East. And, of course, follow Trojans Wire for complete coverage of that game Saturday afternoon on into Saturday evening. And then Sunday morning, my staff writers Adam Bradford and Micah Huff helping me out there. Adam Bradford is a USC alumnus, so you especially want to follow Adam's takes and insights on this USC team. But Ethan and I will see you Sunday, 5 o'clock in LA and on the West Coast, 8 o'clock in the East. So go Trojans. Let's go to Purdue, take care of business, and fight on. We'll see you on